Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Cyber Insurance, a Locum Cover and General Practice Liabilities from Wesleyan. I'm your host today. I'm Kabir Ahmed. I am the General Insurance Commercial Manager, and I'm delighted to introduce you to three experts from around our business and our partners. Firstly, it will be cyber insurance and our partner CFC Insurance, and we have Matt to talk about all things cyber and GP practice related. We then have Graham Layfield, who is our in-house locum expert, and then we have Tom Hogan, who is our in-house business insurance expert. Just a bit of housekeeping before we kick start. Please be aware this will be recorded. We want to circulate to your colleagues and other partner groups so that they are aware. Not everybody could make it this lunchtime, so thank you guys for joining, and those who are watching the recording, please feel free to email us if you have any questions that we don't cover here today. The session will run for about an hour or so it is jam-packed. But this session is designed specifically for healthcare professionals like yourselves. So whether you're a GP, practice manager, or part of the wider healthcare team, it's basically to help you strengthen your protection strategies. As I said, we've got three fantastic experts who will guide us through the key areas. But my colleague Muzz is behind the scenes today, keeping an eye on your questions if you have any. So feel free to put it on the chat and we'll try and address them as we go along. If not, there is a bit at the end where we will have your questions. Right, okay, if we are all set to go. So first up, we're talking about cyber insurance then, a topic that's become increasingly urgent. With us is Matt from CFC, a specialist cyber underwriter. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, thanks, Kev. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you very much for joining us. So let's crack on then. So Matt, let's start with the basics. Why is cyber insurance now considered essential for healthcare providers?
I think it's very apparent from if you actually turn on the TV or look at any news article or any paper at the moment that cyber related issues are definitely increasing, from large scale attacks to we're talking about multinationals, from as simple as like a cloud provider like AWS going down, simultaneously taking down thousands of entities. It's becoming more and more common. Generally over the last few years, we've seen a significant rise in the amount of incidents that are occurring. At CFC alone, we're looking at kind of probably over 4,000 incidents this year out of our portfolio, which is a big increase from around 2,500 over the last couple of years. So we're starting to see a bit of an increase in there. But it's probably not even necessarily the frequency that's the issue. It's probably the severity of things in the main. I think the severity of incidents is definitely starting to go up. We're starting to creep up in general. But I think the real big issue in particular, and why severity is going up, is around the changing methods of the threat tactics that are actually undertaking these attacks. So primarily the big scary one that everyone kind of is worried about, and including the insurance industry, is ransomware in particular. But the reason that's becoming more prevalent and kind of more of a worry is the tactic has shifted from purely just encrypting your systems and locking you out of systems, but they're actually also now stealing your data and saying if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to then release it onto the dark web. So not only are they kind of removing your security of your systems, they're locking you out of being able to actually operate, they're then also causing a data breach in addition to that as well. So you're having to deal with multiple issues simultaneously, and obviously as a result of that, it does mean that you need an expert team behind that can cover all those multifaceted aspects that come with that, essentially.
Okay, so obviously you talked about ransomware and phishing and all those kind of things. Yeah. So one of the sort of big key things in healthcare is how lucrative patient data is. Mm-hmm. What are the consequences of a breach on the patient data, and what can we do to help prevent such measures?
So I think one of the key things to identify is that patient data is valuable in the sense of the ability to sell that online going forward. it's more about what the kind of threat actors, not like the next lot of threat actors can do. So what we see is we might see one group will steal the data and then they'll sell it onto a third party. With that data, the idea is that they can then undertake various other cyber attacks itself. So while the information that they're not that fussed about necessarily the information, the healthcare information itself, is the value that it brings to them. Now, the impact and of that to you guys obviously is going to be a lot different to what the potential impacts you're going to have there. So one of the key things in terms of kind of prevention and trying to reduce that exposure from both just a general data breach, so that could be from them just getting in your systems, getting into email accounts, or even human error, which is a massive part of what we see. I think everyone's guilty here of sending an email to someone they weren't planning to, attachments, or even we CFC, we even cover physical documents as well. So maybe a document or letter's gone out to the wrong person. Those kind of things occur a lot. 75% of the claims that we have actually occur due to some form of human error rather than security breaches. So to protect yourselves, I think one is staff awareness and staff being aware of what their responsibilities are and making those checks, but also having an idea about what potential cyber threats are out there, looking at things like links, phishing emails, not downloading things from sites where you're not kind of confident of using, does make a big difference. And also how you're protecting that data. Obviously there'll be generic systems that you might be using, various kind of softwares out there, but it's making sure that you understand how you protected that. Is the access management controls? Is it encrypted at rest? What format are you kind of holding it in? And what are your obligations in relation to GDPR and the data protection orders and that type of thing as well? So there's a few things there that you can kind of look at, but I think the key thing is make sure that it's the awareness piece, being aware of what your responsibilities are, what to look out for, to avoid falling for social engineering attacks or threat actors, and also just kind of trying to make sure that you're keeping on top of just management of what are you sending out, who are you sending this information to, is it the people you think it is some of the key things to really look out for.
Some of that sounds scary when you think about how easy we humans can make a mistake. I mean, I know I've done that. Sort of, I sent an email to a friend of mine, well, another friend who's got the same name. It's gone to them, so yeah, it can happen. So yeah, it's easily done. Okay, so when it comes to obviously protecting ourselves, so particularly for GP practices, obviously there's this balance between they have the NHS, which obviously when it's been in the media, pretty much on the main NHS have dealt with the cyber related issues, but what do the GP practices themselves need to do to protect themselves further, and where does the liability sort of sit with the NHS and the practice?
Yeah, it's a really, to be honest with you, it's a bit of a grey area between GP practice and the NHS. I don't think the NHS 100% know where the grey line is at this moment in time, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. At the moment, they're fine when it's kind of dealing with maybe the individual pockets, but we've seen recently in the news, and we've seen in healthcare, not just in the UK but globally, we've seen issues whereby simultaneous aspects of a healthcare sector have gone down simultaneously. What happens in that scenario? Who is responsible? Do they have the capacity to deal with all those individual which should happen simultaneously? I think that's one of the things that we provide, and cyber insurance is perfect for, is you have that, there's no grey area. You know that they will pick up, we will deal with the incident regardless of what it is. That includes helping to rebuild the systems, and we can work alongside the NHS, the kind of third party, to help restore that. But there's also going to be various other aspects that you guys are going to be responsible for, potentially in terms of the liability, if there's a liability aspect, but also any impact your business. They're probably not going to pick up in relation to legal costs or any business interruption losses, any rebuild costs of data that you've lost. There's going to by having some form of cyber insurance, you're eliminating the grey, and you're making sure you're protecting your balance sheet and protecting yourselves as a business from potentially any unforeseen costs that the NHS aren't going to pick up. And as I said, as time is going on, cyber risks and cyber claims are becoming a lot more complex. So not knowing and not having that certainty could be a difference between not having to pay anything because the NHS is going to pick it up, or potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds that you've now got to find to actually deal with that incident in that scenario. In particular, ransomware being the most devastating. To give you an idea, it's about 17% of all the claims that we see within the healthcare sector. It accounts for about 72% of all the money that we actually pay out, though, from all the claims. So it makes up, from a frequency point of view, not as common, but severity-wise, it's very damaging. Even in relation to kind of data breaches, we see quite a lot of data breaches. One of the big benefits of having a cyber insurer, especially with ourselves, is actually we're very good at neutering those issues from actually developing into anything further. We have a fully inbuilt in-house team here, many of which are actually also legally trained and have law degrees, and we understand when we need to notify, if we need to notify, and understand all the regulatory aspects too. So what that means is we actually want to make sure that we don't end up having to pay liability in the first place. And generally speaking, we're very successful at making sure that we don't even have issues where an individual will come to you and say, I'm upset about this, you've leaked my data, I'm looking for some form of damages or liability off the back of it. So I think having that aspect there just means it takes away reduces the potential for someone to say, I'm not happy about this, I'm going to sue you for leaking my data. So they're having that experts in your back pocket, which otherwise would cost you tens of thousands of pounds for an actually fraction of a price. It is kind of a no-brainer in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, we talked about costs and busy practices, and many of our practices are struggling to balance that financing and the sort of cost and budgets and all of those things. Now, as I see it, having worked in insurance industry for a number of years now, practices have always paid on the main for their property damage and the employers and public liability. It almost feels like that's an extra cost now to add cyber to it. And I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, how do they mitigate that cost, or how do they almost balance that with having to pay out?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things to think about, right? I think every single year you'll have your property damage, and you'll buy fire insurance. The statistics show that you're 20 times more likely to have a cyber event than you are a fire, but we would never question ever buying fire insurance. Right. So, and unfortunately, the world, so I suppose unfortunately in some ways, but great in some ways, is that we are now in a digital age. Everything we rely on our everything from our computers. We're sitting here today doing a Teams meeting, which would never have been possible maybe 10 years ago, right? We are now there's more reliance on things like AI, which is something we pick up under the word in, and also affirmatively. We're more reliant on new healthcare systems. There's e-health that is a rapidly expanding part of the healthcare sector, and as a result, things become more digital. If we lose that, and if you lose that and don't have that available, it's going to cause a massive impact to the business. So realistically, the digital and your data, which is your lifeblood and operating of the business, is just as, if not more so, important than the actual bricks and mortar that you actually do operations on. Because think about it, in some respects, during COVID, we was able to kind of still keep operating, even if it was from a remote basis, and that does include the healthcare sector to some extent. So you could argue that the digital aspect is almost more important now than it's ever been, even more so than potentially even the physical location, if you really want to be a bit biased from my point of view.
Now that's interesting, yeah, because obviously we as a commercial, or certainly I've been in insurance, nobody comes in, I want to insure for fire and sort of flood. It's usually about what happens if if I leave the fridge on and lost all the drugs, that kind of thing. So it's interesting how you say that and put it in there. So thank you for that. You mentioned obviously we live in a digital world, things are changing, and if anything, healthcare is always advanced. They're always trying new digital technologies and things. One of the biggest ones we're hearing certainly is around the use of AI. A lot of practices are obviously, in terms of resources, so they're having challenges, and having AI helps them to do simple tasks like transcribing. So how does that fit into the cyber world in terms of breaches and then protecting against that?
So I mean, the way we see it, we just see it as a normal part of a computer system. So we don't kind of discriminate between AI and general systems that are there. There is the potential for things for AI to make a mistake. There could be, if there's a data breach in any respect of data or any other aspects that you're responsible for, the policy still would react just as it would if it was your own proprietary systems or software. So and we've affirmatively put language to confirm like any sort of use of AI is absolutely fine and would be triggered as part of the policy. So yeah, I mean, AI is definitely going to be increasing in healthcare. I think it's one of the things that would hopefully help make it kind of more efficient and help GPs do what they do best, which is actually see their patients and actually get a bit more face-to-face time rather than having to do things very manually as historically. So yeah, it's something we understand, and we're more than happy to kind of make sure we're picking up those exposures that kind of arise from misuse, and hopefully any problems that do arise or don't arise from it as well.
So using AI specifically when we're transcribing, I guess is there a bit where there's a I don't know, coming between a cyber policy and a med mal policy? So what I'm trying to say is, if something's been transcribed as a medical diagnosis, so it becomes a clinical negligence, that's the error cause. At what point is it cyber, and at what point is it med mal, or is there not clear distinction at the moment?
So there's not technically a distinction at the moment. I think it would boil down to what's occurred. So if it's a breakdown in the AI itself hasn't been able to recognize where the issues occurred from. I mean, technically speaking, obviously the use of AI itself isn't materially this aspect. Obviously, med-mal would be you understanding and we'll look at it from a point of view of, have I interpreted this right? Have I put the information in correctly? Cyber wouldn't necessarily pick up in relation to kind of, oh, that AI system hasn't worked correctly, because there isn't it hasn't caused you to misdiagnose, in the sense of there's not a cyber event that which has occurred. That'd be more the of an exposure. Yeah, it's more of an error, and the error itself would, yeah, and whoever's developed the AI itself it's kind of their technical responsibility in that sense. So there's a bit of a crossover between the liability of the AI provider and then obviously the how it's been interpreted. So there's a little bit of a grey area around that. Obviously, this is one of the things around the ever-changing environment. Which this is so much early doors. We're talking literally like what, the last year or two that this has really started recurring. So I don't know if there's a definitive line, and I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't know if there's ever going to be a kind of concrete line. There's always going to be certain grey areas in terms of the nuances about where the exposure lies. I think from the cyber point of view, the key thing is making sure that if there is an issue, if that software or that piece of AI causes you to have a cyber event, that it is going to be picked up and it is going to cover you for those scenarios whereby it could even be nothing. It's something that's totally outside your control, but however, you're now faced with the issue, and that is something that, again, the NHS probably isn't really going to pick up and leaves you with that exposure.
Yeah, no, and that kind of makes sense. So, I suppose all of the things I'm trying to get to, insurance gets this rap. Insurance as a whole gets this rap from most people out there, that actually pay for insurance, but it's never going to pay. Well, the bit behind it is actually insurers work amongst themselves. So if you have a cyber policy somewhere, med mal policy sitting somewhere else, another type, if there is a grey between the three, they will work out where it's like. You just have to notify all three as to this is what happening.
Exactly that, and we kind of write our policy to act as primary in most things on that basis, that we're happy to take control of that, and obviously to have those communications. We regularly see certain kind of crossovers between certain products. PI in particular, you can see quite a lot of crossover depending on what's happened. So we kind of always write our word into to act as primary when it comes to an incident which is cyber related.
Yeah, but the clear sort of differential is errors and omissions. That's really your negligence side of things.
Yeah.
If somebody then breached into the system with a vulnerability, that's either the software provider, or it's a cyber-related incident, which comes in that way.
Exactly that. Brilliant. Perfect.
No, really appreciate that. Thank you, Matt. That's quite interesting, and hopefully if any of the guys out there or our audience, if you have any questions for Matt, please throw them in and we'll come back to Matt later on. Right. Next up, we have Graham. Graham, thanks for being here. You and I obviously have worked together for a long time, but the things you have to say around locum are so interesting, and there's a lot that I always learn every time I speak to you about locum cover. So let me start with that. So locum cover is often seen as a nice to have and sometimes costly. Why should practices treat it as essential?
Thanks, Cam. Well, and thank you everyone for inviting me along. Cam, yeah, you're right. You and I used to have dark hair. We never had all these grey hairs when we started. So we've been doing this a while, haven't we? Locum cover, sickness protection. Actually, I think this is one of those areas, unlike what Matt was talking around cyber, which is a relatively new thing, the absence protection and protecting the risk of key staff and doctors and key staff absence is something that practices are pretty familiar. I was just scanning around the names of the delegates watching us, and I recognise a few practice names that actually have locum policy with a few that have got surgery and cyber insurance with us as well. So there are plenty of people here who are familiar with what we do. But why absence cover? I think it's something that everybody is familiar that affects that is a risk of the practice, which affects the practice profits. Ultimately, protecting practice profits is all about protecting partners' income, because that's how partners make their income. It's what's left after you've spent everything that drives what the partners earn and keeps the business going. It's estimated that about 70% of the costs of most businesses, and certainly would be true of GP businesses, is actually costs associated with the people in there. So it follows that if in the world of GPs, well, we've got a largely fixed income through global sums and QOF points, etc. The biggest variable is how much we spend. And actually, if 70% of your costs are associated with the people, it follows that one of the biggest risks associated to your business is the risk of unexpected staff costs, and absence is one of those huge ones. The world's changed fairly dramatically in the last decade. Go back 8-9 years, and it was all about doctors and the risk of doctors leaving. Sort of going off absent, and how much the impact of that is, and how crippling that could be on a practice. Whilst that is still important, obviously 2017 became the introduction of the locum support payments for GPs through the from the NHS contract, and that's jumped up largely in the last 12 months. We've seen something like a 27% increase in that, and brought it back in real terms to what it was in 2017. So I think everyone's familiar with the idea of getting local protection. Doctors still remain the sort of the first discussion we'll have. But I think the thing that's really also changed is that we've moved away from practices just being about doctors, a reception team, a practice management team. There's so many more roles. There are clinical pharmacists, nurse practitioners, all of those different roles. I noticed that we've got somebody from North Norfolk Primary Care. You've got all the R's funded roles that are within practices now, and all that comes about. So I think it's understanding how it's changed. I think everybody's recognised that was always a risk. I think it's the risk has changed for practices over the last few years, particularly.
Right. Okay. So what should practice managers and their partners sort of consider then when they are sort of thinking about resource planning and absence and all those kind of things?
Absolutely firm believer in that every single GP business is unique. You've got to look at it from your own perspective and how it applies to you. There are some general principles, but each practice is different. The partnership agreements are different. The makeup of the practice team is different in each practice, but there'll be some similarities. My absolute top tip for everybody here listening is, if you haven't done this already, do this. And that's do a contingency planning exercise across your practice. Discussion with the partners, practice management team. And actually just consider all of those roles that are in your practice, and just apply a simple principle to it. What would happen? What would we have to do if that person or that people in that role were unable to come to work tomorrow? We were unable to speak to them. and we were unable to have contact with them, and they were going to be absent for 12 months. If we took that person out with no means to do anything, what's our contingency plan? What would we have to do? Whether that's one of the practice management team, which is one of the huge changes in the last decade. They were always important. My mum was a practice manager, retired in the late, about 10 years ago. The world, she'll tell you with contacts she's got, the world that she was a practice manager in and what it is now is massively different. It is becoming absolutely essential for every practice, and it's different. The impact of a practice manager in a small 2-3 man doctor to a practice management team in a 15-20 clinician site, it's different. So it's again unique. What would we have to do for our practice? Look at all those different roles. The other thing I would suggest to do is make sure that you talk to your primary care network about those roles which are essential for you. The thing we find with the ours funded roles particularly is that they fall into one of two categories. They're services which we really, really want to provide, but if somebody's absent, it doesn't affect our day-to-day running. And then there are those roles which actually are in practices, maybe seeing patients, that if those people are not there, the practices have to cover and actually fill that resource. What's the contingency plan you've agreed with the primary care network to replace those people? Because the PCN have no obligation to do so under the DES, and actually they're people maybe who may not even be employed by you, but it's a conversation to have, and it's things like that. So I think for me, it's contingency planning around the people you employ in your practice and the people who work in your practice who may be sourced through the primary care network, and plan for those.
Thank you, Graham. So that's another extra thing you're asking our practice managers to do on top of the other things they've got to do.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
But with that, and without making a joke of it, practice managers are very busy, whether it's juggling through resource, whether there's a complaint, whether there's somebody slipped and fall. Everything goes down through the practice manager, and they're the heart and soul of our GP practices. What support and what is Wesleyan's proposition that could help our practice managers out there?
As I say, I'm talking with an audience where a few of you will be familiar with the advisors who cover this area, Keith and Chris and people like that. So some of you will be familiar with the Wesleyan proposition. For those who are not, so Wesleyan Financial Services, we have a number of specialist areas, one of which is our GP team. Our GP advisors do nothing but look after GPs, GP practices and the staff within those practices in all areas of financial planning, from newly qualified through retirement and beyond retirement, but also around the practices, around looking at risk assessments of the practices is there. We are the exclusive financial advice provider for RCGP. So RCGP recognise that. We've been in that partnership for 4 years. So as I say, that's a really important thing for us, that the Royal College recognise us as their exclusive financial advice provider. And I suppose the one other thing that I would have to throw in is this is where our worlds overlap. And this might be something for those of you who have your locum cover through the Wesleyan's Practice Protector Plus policy. That becomes, we are a mutual society. Having that policy, because it's manufactured by us, makes your practice a member of the society. Our society members, one of the rewards, one of the things you're entitled to is a member rewards discount of 20% on the cost of things like your surgery insurance, the cyber insurance that you're talking about. So what it is Cab and Tom and the team there will source best price for you, and then the society will actually contribute 20% of that cost. So to it, and that's something that we do for those member qualifying. So if you do have PP Plus with us and you don't have your surgery insurance or your other insurances through, talk to your advisors, talk to CAB, talk to the team. So I think that proposition is the specialism and the being a mutual society. I think that's something I really, really value.
Thank you, Graham. So that sounds like particularly the point about the contribution from Wesleyan. So basically, Matt gets his full money, Wesleyan contribute 20%, and you do 80%. Win-win for everybody. So thank you, Graham. Right, Graham, likewise, I'll hopefully come back to you at the end if we've got any more questions. Right, so we'll move on to our in-home business insurance expert, Tom Hogan. Welcome, Tom.
Hello, Cab.
Right, So, Tom, let's crack on. So, you obviously deal with a myriad of policies and protection needs that GP and GP practices need, as well as looking at from a PCN level. So whether it's a one-man small GP practice or it's a sort of collection or group of community practices, you help and try and protect them as much as possible. Obviously, you look after management liability policies, med-mal, business insurance, and all of those kind of things. But Tom, a lot of our GP practices are not aware why they need management liability policies. Can you give us some ideas as to why they should consider this type of protection?
Yeah, I think management liability, other people, first of all, hello everyone, sorry. Management liability, as some people call it, directors and officers, other people will call it, it's all the same policy. And what it is, it covers the business in terms of the directors themselves, the business itself, for a number of claims that we're seeing a big rise in, mainly from employment disputes and claims coming from that kind of area. As GP practices grow and PCNs come involved, and there's all these extra roles like Graham's discussed, there's all these extra avenues for claims made against practices and PCNs for employment matters. So we're seeing a lot of claims come in for that. We've had examples of it with ourselves. We see the ones that insurers will speak to us about, and these aren't small matters. When you get solicitors involved and they go to tribunals and there's potential awards for compensation, they can get very expensive. And I know, as Graham said earlier, just to me picked up on that, the profits of a GP practice is effectively the partner's earnings. The directors and officers element of it actually protects the partners personally. They have a personal liability as partners in the business for things that they do in terms of kind of regulatory investigations, mismanagement of funds, all that kind of stuff that you would get as a business owner. And if something was to happen, this policy is there to protect them and their own personal assets, because obviously that's what they would lose. Things like their home, their profits, things like that is quite important to them.
It's interesting what you say there. So what you're saying is, if there is, let's say, I don't know, an allegation of mismanagement or somebody was wrongfully dismissed, when it goes to court, the actual cost burden falls on the individual, not the business. Is that what you're saying?
It can and it can't. So, I mean, the best way to do this is by an example, and Graham's probably heard me talk about this many times, and he's already smiling, he knows. We had a client, and a claim was brought against them for a number of issues. It was things like harassment, disability discrimination, and things like that. And it was named, the way that the litigation comes in, it's looking for the path of least resistance. So what they did is they named 3 of the partners and the practice itself on there. So the directors and officers having 3 elements of cover. It covers both the directors personally, and it also covers the entity, the business. So that picked up everything under one umbrella. So they basically passed it on to me. We dealt with the one insurer who covered both elements, and they dealt with that claim there. Now, it wasn't an insignificant claim. The amount claimed, was being claimed was about 1.4 million. The actual legal costs on top of that were £500,000, and they were successful in defending it. So it only cost the insurer it cost the insurer £500,000. But had that insurance not been in place, that would have been on the shoulders of the GPs and the partners to pay that £500,000 to defend that matter. And if the worst case scenario happened, they were to lose that 1.4 million, that would have come out of there as well. Now, not many businesses have that in the bank. As a GP partner, you are liable for that. Where's that coming from? That's selling houses, that's giving up life savings, pensions, things like that. So although it's a general insurance product, it is really, really part of protection. And Graham will probably tell me off if I don't mention, they did have a Practice Protector Plus plan with us, and the person who was claiming against the business was off for 12 months, and they actually claimed £70,000 off our Practice Protector policy. So everything by us working together as that one Wesleyan kind of, we cover everything that you need to cover. We covered all the bases. There was no financial loss to the business. And I mean, I spoke to the client quite recently. They're still a client of ours after many years, and they said they had sleepless nights, and the reason that they're still here today is because Wesleyan met that claim head on with them. So we're seeing more and more employment claims rise, and that is probably the biggest part of directors and officers. It's nice to have that comfort for partners that if something was to happen, their personal assets are protected, the company assets are protected, but it's dealing with those employment claims, because some people get slightly confused with what's on their office policy. There's sometimes employment disputes and tribunal awards and things like that. The key problem with that is there's a reasonable prospect of success clause on there, so they have to deem they're going to win the case or they won't take it on, which is horrendous if you think about it. It's, we're going to lose this, so we won't support you. Whereas on a directors and officers policy, there is none of that cover requirement. So if you've got a 1% chance or 0% chance of doing that, they will cover any kind of costs and also any compensation awards.
Sorry to cut in, Tom. So this is the legal protection you're talking about, where it has a reasonable prospect of.
Yeah. So on most people's surgery insurance, so most people buy packaged commercial product for surgery insurance, so they'll have their employer's liability, public liability, contents, business interruption, all that kind of thing on there. And generally, I'd probably say 99.9% of them on the market have a legal expenses add-on on there, and in that is that element I was talking about there, the legal protection around employment disputes and compensation awards. But that is where that key kind of, I want to say, get out of jail clause for the legal expenses provider is that reasonable prospects of success clause. Whereas, like I said, on the D&O and the management liability policy, you just know you're covered. You go to bed at night and you know if anything comes up in the morning, it's going to be met by the insurers.
Thank you. And as a business insurance expert, so in terms of, obviously you deal with a myriad of different types of policies, whether it's med mal, whether it's a surgery insurance, employers life, all of those kind of things. There's a lot of protection out there, and certainly when we've spoken to practices in general, they weren't aware of a lot of these things that they can protect. So can you just give us a sort of almost a quick overview of the kind of protection they can do and what kind of questions to ask either of themselves or a broker or someone, so they can get the right advice? Because as you can imagine, practice managers, they've got a lot on their plate. Insurance conversation probably happens once a year if you've not made a claim, and it's difficult to try and then get it, because on one hand, you've got to balance the cost of buying insurance because you've got to find the cheapest policy, otherwise it's eating into your costs. And on the other hand, thinking about, well, what if a claim happens? I'm paying for that.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of the belt and braces approach to cover absolutely every risk. And this is where your broker comes in. Hopefully it will be us, but if you've got a different broker, it's having that discussion with them about managing the risks. Is what are my biggest risks? And like I said, we've discussed cyber. Cyber is growing and growing and growing as a risk to GP practice. I mean, been doing this 14 years now, and 14 years ago, no one would ask anything about cyber. It was actually, there was a slight element bolted onto a policy that soon got taken off and claims started landing by the insurer. Now probably 50% of our discussions are around cyber and concerns that GP practices have. Like Matthew discussed, that there's that grey line of what is covered, what isn't covered. And it's about going, like I said, going to bed at night and knowing that if something happens, there's someone there to react and help you with that. So the cyber is always going to be a key element. You're going to have your surgery insurance as well. I'm sure everyone's sick to death of people telling about that, but that is there to protect obviously the contents, liability, slip, trip, falls, accidents that patients may have, employees may have. And just the one key thing on there is check with your broker the definition of an employee, as we've discussed earlier. These extra roles that are being brought in, if you're part of a PCN, while they're at your practice, they're classed as employees. Are they going to be covered? Because the last thing you want to do is someone to come in and have an accident and you're liable for that. The majority will, but just make sure that that's the case. And things like that. So business interruption is another one. If there was anything to happen, making sure that the practice's income is protected there as well. We've gone over management liability as well. That's another key one. And the other kind of one that we're seeing as well is as the structure in primary care has changed, as you know, with PCNs being involved, things like that, all these extra services involved is ensuring that what you're doing is covered by your cover for NHS GP. There are some roles out there, and I mean, it depends. You will need to check this with your actual individual provider. But some people we've spoken to, their contract doesn't cover the alternative roles. So we've had to put policies in place for PCNs that covers liability for say a physio that travels around all the practices and things like that. So double checking those. And I think, like Matthew said, this is the problem. There's no one size fits all with every NHS kind of they're not called CCGs anymore, NHS board across the country. So it's just checking that and making sure that you are covered, because the last thing you want is a claim to come in for say a physio who's working on behalf of PCN at your practice and you're lumbered with it because there's nothing in place for that. So that's super important as well. That will cover belt and braces of really the insurance risks. Graham's touched on there the kind of what we can cover as well in terms of sickness as well, because that's obviously another big risk. It's a lot more frequent than probably a lot of the insurance stuff, because it's quite easy for people to get sick compared to some of the things that the insurance will react to. So having all these in place and having them hopefully with one provider means that there's them discussions across the lines. Like Matthew said, quite often a claim will breach both a cyber and a directors and officers policy. So having insurers that work together, a broker that can work together to get those sorted for you is super important, because the last thing you want when you have a claim is for you to be spending lots and lots of time dealing with it. You want to pass it on and just get it dealt with.
Thank you, Tom. That's quite exciting. Well, that's quite good to hear that there is protection out there. We just need to ask the right questions, isn't it? And having the right broker or the right conversations will probably hopefully steer you into getting the protection that you need. And you don't have to have it all, but those conversations.
It's having the discussions, Cab, and kind of quantifying the risk to yourselves. Every practice is different. Like I said, some practices have big exposures for travel clinics and things like that aren't necessarily covered and things like that. Some don't do it at all. So by us saying everyone needs cover for this, it isn't a one size fits all. It's having that discussion with your broker. Just phone them up and let them know what you're doing as a practice, and we're experienced enough, and hopefully other brokers are, that we can see if there's any spots there and we can say, look, there's a small exposure here, and it generally is quite small. You run the risk of this happening. Is it something you'd like to look at covering? If not, that's fine. You're aware of it and it's something you can manage in-house. If it's something you'd like to ensure, if the worst happened, that an insurer would react to it, then it's something we can source as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. A quick time check. I think we're pretty much nearing to the final segment, which is basically questions from the audience here. But before we get to it, and I'll give you a bit of time if you do want to put questions, please put it on the chat. But the next 5 minutes, I'll just open up our three guests and almost sort of try and holistically put this together. And when I'm looking at the three guests, I think and it's right when you think about our GP practices, the importance of data that's got to be protected. Staff are sort of heart and soul of a practice, and then the operation itself, which is the management side of things, that's really important. In the end, the point is, if things do happen and things go wrong, the reassurance is there are things you can do in terms of mitigating those risks, but at the same time, there are protection that you can get if there is something that you can't mitigate or you can't afford to bear the costs. So I'm going to come back to you, Matt, if that's okay. So obviously we talked about AI and all the other types of things, but we briefly touched on what they can do to mitigate. But in sort of Tom's world, when he's looking at a property and things that are physical, he can see the risks. In a cyber world, you can't. So is there some sort of vulnerability test or some things that the practice can do to see if there is something hiding, lurking behind the scenes?
Yeah, so part of what we actually offer at CFC, we've actually started rolling out what we what we call threat reviews and proactive services. So part of the offering, what we do, we are looking for the vulnerabilities that threat actors are actually exploiting to get into bypass cybersecurity. It's one of the biggest growing areas of cyber attack is the exploitation of vulnerabilities. A lot of that has been driven by the use of AI, being able to find where these flaws are and able to get bypass even the best cybersecurity out there in the world. I mean, even if you're spending millions of pounds on your cybersecurity, you're still just as vulnerable. We've already talked about the human error aspect, but they're now even bypassing the cybersecurity tools you're putting in place and are being most likely being reassured that they're never going to be breached. From our evidence, that's very much not apparent. So what we are now doing is we're actually able to highlight any potential vulnerabilities that you guys potentially do have directly, or we can actually be continuously throughout the policy period are looking for potential threats that are definitely going to impact you. So we can see whether or not a threat actor is targeting you, or there's a vulnerability that you guys can help prevent from being exploited. So having those types of services, we've quantified it that most businesses, it would cost them around £60,000 to have those types of services kind of externally. We're providing that from every single client that we deal with, all in-house here, and we are able to provide that information to you and actually how to remediate a lot of that as well in addition. So you're being provided with a lot of tools and also the promise to kind of protect from our side. And then even if there is a cyber event, you then also have the ability to be able to claim your insurance and have us kind of project manage and take control of that claim on your behalf to remove any of that stress or issues around that. So we have lots of kind of tools to have a look into that potential around ransomware calculators, see how much it could impact you as an individual business. And what I'm going to do after this and on behalf of and Wesleyan will send this across to you is actually give you some of these resources that you can kind of have a look at and say, look, these are the tools that I could have access to. Here's a way to kind of quantify what is sometimes seen as the intangible kind of exposure that you can't necessarily see, and also give you some real life examples of things that we've seen that have actually happened to GP practice and healthcare risks of your kind of size and operation as well. So I'm going to kind of put like hopefully a nice little pack together for you guys to make it nice and easy to really give you a bit more of an overview. There's so much we can talk about with cyber. We can spend easily an hour plus on it, but I think it's just giving the information to you guys so that you guys can have a look into it and really look at it from all the various aspects that kind of crop up. Because unfortunately cyber is ever evolving and the threat landscape is always changing, and so we're trying to help with that as much as possible.
No, thank you, Matt. That's brilliant. Yeah, for the audience out there, what we'll do is after the webinar is finished, we'll slowly get these resources from Matt and forward them on to you. So thank you, Matt. Graham, I want to come back to you. I'm interested in sort of, obviously you've been working in the GP area for a long time, not that long, but
it is.
I know, I don't want to show your age there. But no, so what can practice managers do in terms of sort of with staff absence and things and well-being? How can they help their staff be better and feel good about themselves when they are coming to work so that they do reduce sickness absence?
Okay, interesting question. I mean, in terms of just it's planning, it's talking, it's that well-being stuff. I mean, one of the things is it's just financial well-being, full stop. And I mentioned that the advice side of things, and don't be afraid if you're whether you're a Wesleyan customer or somebody who hasn't spoken to us before. The advisors in your area will help you. Will come out and they'll do sessions, lunch and learn sessions, things like that on NHS pension schemes, probably the most complex. We've got a budget around the corner. What does that mean for your doctors, for their staff? Those are the sorts of things you can use those resources with us. Obviously, we'll always prioritise those who are members, but just if you're not a member, don't feel afraid for that. That's how our relationships start with those. Can I just take a little step back and just take a general observation from the call, if I may, Cab?
Please, sir.
And it's really just as an observation, just thinking about you guys who are listening into us. So you've got Matt, myself, Tom, Cab talking about all these different risks associated with the practice, and I promise you every single one of those is very real, very realistic. But when we're talking about insurances, I never lose sight of the fact that whenever we buy insurance, whether that's my Labrador's just trying to nudge me and tell me it's dinner time and things like that, whether it's my pet insurance or whether it's Locum insurance or whatever it might be, the principle behind insurance is that we're paying a premium for something we hope we don't use. And we hope we don't need to. And we've got all these different risks. And the one thing Tom mentioned, the ever-increasing complexity of primary care, particularly in England. And we're going to get another tier with neighbourhood healthcare services introduced from next year and so on. So that's going to only make it even more complicated, and more sharing of data, more resources, and more people working in multiple roles, all of that stuff. Be reassured that the Toms, Matts, yourself, the team I work with, the advisors across the country, the whole reason we exist is to help you out with those. You've got, and let's go back to the point I started with, which is that how this looks in your business is unique to you. And there's a really simple approach. Yeah, talked about the contingency plan. That's really important. I absolutely believe not enough do that. But if you then start looking at your problems and just think of a two-axis thing, about the probability of something happening and the consequences. High, low, high, low. Anything with high probability and high consequence is no-brainer. You've got to do something to protect that. You'll have some risks which you can classify as low probability, low impact. You can probably park those. All your conversation should be in those grey areas, which is high probability or high impact. And if you look at those, and that will help you then tailor, use the resources that are available with you. If I can give you one thing, use Tom, use the relationship Tom and you have with people like Matt, use the financial advisors, the Keith Johnsons and Chris Lovedays and the other guys that cover this part of the world, those people that you know, use those resources. You mentioned, we joked and made that sort of asking practice managers, incredibly busy people. You don't have to know the answers to everything. You need to know the people to ask is my biggest tip.
Thank you, Graham. And Tom, finally, obviously we talked about business insurance, and Graham kind of touched on how we help and try and support the other staff members, whether it's the practice manager, receptionist. Can you talk about a few other things that we do here at Wesleyan?
Yes, obviously there's elements of cover on our practice insurance that practice can really benefit from. There's wellbeing support and things like that, helplines that come as standard with insurance, so that it helps kind of minimize that risk of staff absences. I mean, we've been over a lot of what we cover already, so the cyber insurance, the directors and officers, the surgery insurance and things like that. I mean, in terms of what else, like I said, there's some small risk stuff around professional indemnity, medical malpractice in PCNs, and cover for those alternative role reimbursements. But those really, like I said earlier, the belt and brace cover everything kind of points. But like Graham said, that it's that point like of what are the chances and what is the cost, and kind of measuring those up against each other.
Thank you, Tom. Right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. I know it's a lot of information in such a short space of time, and I know you all, the three of you, can talk about these things weeks on end, but obviously we haven't got enough time, so I'm conscious we're nearing the end. I can't see any questions that have come up on the chat. So if you've not had a chance to think about the kind of things you want to ask or anything, please feel free to email Wesleyan. I think most of the invites come from us, so more than happy from us to take the questions and him to get the sort of allocate the questions to Graham, Matt or Tom and come back to you. But there isn't any more on that, so I'm going to finish a little bit early. Practice managers, hooray, 5 minutes. At least you've got time because you don't have any spare time at all. Oh, Graham. You're on mute, Graham.
So a yellow card for me too. So I just point everybody in the direction. If you please, email us, we'll answer any questions you've got. If you want to find out more, just visit wesleyan.co.uk. We've got dedicated sites on all of the things we've talked about today, and the means to get in touch with us and get in touch with a local advisor or the commercial general insurance team. So yeah, point you in that direction.
Brilliant, Graham. Thank you. Right, so thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you found the session insightful and practical. This is recorded, so we will share that both for you and other peers that you've got around your business. But as I say, we've covered a lot. So the growing importance of cyber insurance in healthcare, the peace of mind when it comes to locum cover, and the essential protections offered from general liability insurance, whether it's management liability. So on it. a huge thank you to our expert guests, Matt, Graham and Tom. So thank you for your inputs.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you guys for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you very much.